So paper 3, AQA Psychology, the topic of relationship review updated to 2025. The evolutionary explanation for partner preference has never been a 16-mark essay, but it's been an 8-marker twice, including last year in 2024. As you can see, you have to include in your answer the relationship between sexual selection and human reproductive behavior. So we're going to clarify. Sexual selection is a type of natural selection where the traits that are inherited are not necessarily advantageous for personal individual survival, but enhance reproductive success, so make you more desirable to the other sex, and therefore are traits that have been maintained. The most obvious example is the peacock tail. As we can see, male peacocks have these sexual selection traits, and we'll see in a minute why there are these gender differences. So the kind of question you might get is discuss evolutionary explanation for partner preference, and this including the relationship between sexual selection and human reproductive behavior. So first of all, you would address the evolutionary aspect and talk about how evolution selects certain traits and partners for reproductive purposes, and therefore the choice of partner is to enhance the survival of one's genes, and therefore the sexual selection is the inheritance of certain traits because they increase the chance of evolutionary survival. Human reproductive behavior is what we do when we choose our mate. For example, who we choose, who we're attracted to, reproductive strategies, how do we get someone to basically get together with us. These behaviors in humans, remember this is human reproductive behavior, are influenced by evolutionary pressures but also cultural norms. So they'll be a bit more sophisticated than in animals. Next, you address the aspect of human reproductive behavior. So you can talk about the fact that humans choose mates, and there are two main ways. Intrasexual selection, that is competition between members of the same sex, and that's most likely to be between men, and intersexual selection, that is members of one sex having preferences of one type of man, for example, than another. For ease of clarity, I've decided to use pink for females and blue for males. Don't look too much into it. It just seemed to be the most straightforward way of highlighting the gender differences that have been highlighted in this theory. So males are more competitive, so that intrasexual selection will happen in males, and they're looking for females that show signs of fertility. They'll compete for those females that seem to have the highest chance of being reproductive, so youthful, symmetrical, high waist to hip ratio, whereas females are more likely to be attracted to males that provide, and they'll be more picky, and obviously that's because there are gender differences in reproductive strategies. So there are gender differences in reproductive structures. Males can have multiple babies simultaneously and never stop being fertile, whereas females can have only one pregnancy at a time, so with that one partner, and have a smaller window of opportunity. So it makes sense that males are more likely to want to conquer as many females as possible and compete with other males to get as many as they can. And at the same time, this mate guarding behavior is keeping an eye out for no one else to go with their female partner, because that would question the paternity of their children. So then they might be protecting babies that don't have their genes. Whereas for females, it's more choosing a partner that is most likely to give them children that will survive. So if the male is a desirable male with strong traits, then if they have sons, those sons are likely A, to survive, B, to reproduce themselves, therefore to propagate their genes over the generations. And they prefer long courtships because that shows commitment and the fact that the man is going to be around them for a longer amount of time to help raise the babies and therefore enhance the chance of survival of the babies. So in terms of evaluation, we've got a lot of research that suggests the universality of certain desirable traits. BUS carried out research on 10,000 people across 37 cultures, and they've found consistently that women desired men with good financial prospects. Men weren't interested that much in finances, whereas men rated physical attractiveness the most important. And remember that physical attractiveness is a sign of health, but also of youth. And men universally would prefer a partner that is younger than them. It doesn't matter what their age is. The preferred average is in the kind of early 20s range for any age of man. Clark and Hatfield showed how the kind of promiscuity and the desire to have sex with as many people as possible is more common in men and women. They had this field experiment where Confederates would ask individuals of the opposite sex whether they would go to bed with them that night, and they had a 75% consent from male respondents, and no female at all said yes. That links to that long courtship and those differences in mating and mate choice behaviors. And again, we've got other research that suggests the weight to hip ratios are consistent across time and across cultures, and other features of female attractiveness are less important. And if we think about it, that supports the view that mate choice seems to be directed at choosing someone who will reproduce with a man, and the waist to hip ratio says two things to the man. One, that the woman isn't pregnant already because the waist is smaller, and two, that because the hips are larger, they will be more able to have a successful birth. Remember, our brain hasn't evolved into knowing that there are cesarean sections, for example, so the male brain will still detect that as a desirable trait, one of the most desirable traits, along with youth. Women have variations, and that's where we bring in that aspect of human reproductive behavior being different than animal reproductive behavior because of the complexity of the human culture compared to the animal societies. For example, women wanted a man with means and access to resources in cultures where women's status and educational opportunities were more limited, meaning that today some females don't look for those assets anymore if they're in a society where they can achieve those assets themselves. So there are variations cross-culturally that are determined by the society's norms. So the second topic that we look at is factors affecting attraction in romantic relationships. There are lots of subsections here, so we're going to look at them one by one. The first one is self-disclosure. There were short questions in 2023 and 2024, and they assessed both AO1s and AO3s. In 2024 it was maybe 6 AO3s, so they asked both to outline and evaluate. It hasn't been an extended question as yet. So, first of all, you would talk about how why is self-disclosure linked to attraction, and attraction is seen as the starting point for a relationship. So basically who we choose and why, and self-disclosure is a reason we choose someone because we feel that we can trust them and they trust us back. If someone tells you something about themselves, then they're showing to you that they trust you. And if they do, you feel more close, you feel less threatened by them, and you also will feel that it's easier to communicate because they're open to you. So it will be easier to resolve any conflict that arises because they're actually telling you how they actually feel rather than you having to mind read. And that explains the link between self-disclosure and attraction. Social penetration theory would be what you would talk about next. That talks about both the depth and breadth of disclosure over time. And like the layers of an onion, slowly people will disclose more and more intimate details as they get closer and they get to know a person more. So if someone was disclosed too much too soon, that might feel uncomfortable. If they were not to disclose after many, many months or years, that would also feel uncomfortable. So it's a balance between the depth versus the breadth of topics determined by the amount of time that has been spent in the relationship. Another factor that is really important about self-disclosure is that it needs to be reciprocal. If it's only one way, when one person is kind of peeling those layers of the onion and the other is not, then it will bring an imbalance to the relationship. Especially at the beginning of the relationship, there needs to be that reciprocal, equal exchange. As trust grows in the relationship, people might be less focused on thinking about how much they say, how much the other says, because that kind of openness and vulnerability has already been displayed at the beginning of the relationship. So, moving on to evaluation. There's a very famous study on 36 questions. These are 36 questions that increasingly become more and more personal, and therefore the depth of the questions increases over 45 minutes. And they ask people to sit and answer both, so reciprocally answer the questions. And this was compared to a control group that just engaged in small talk. Everyone who was in the experimental group reported a significantly higher feeling of closeness. Some reported that they felt as close as people that they've known for years. And 2 participants who completed the questions ended up getting married 6 months later. And more than half had a conversation afterwards, so they didn't just leave it there to the study, they actually felt a bond that was higher. So we have got quite strong, significant evidence that self-disclosure does promote a sense of connection, intimacy, and therefore attraction. We've also got research comparing reciprocal and not reciprocal self-disclosure, and unsurprisingly, mutual self-disclosure, so not just one person talking, has been found to be considerably more connected to higher levels of attraction. So there are other factors that Shaver identified. That is not only the reciprocity of the self-disclosure, but also how the person responds to it. So this is a criticism to social penetration theory, as in one aspect that hasn't really been considered. So if I open up to someone and they open up back to me, but we kind of ignore each other, we don't acknowledge if someone opens up and tells us something really intimate, and we don't respond to it, then we won't have that level of attraction. So social penetration theory loses nuance by not looking at how the self-disclosure is received, and looks only at how much and the kind of degree of intimacy of that disclosure. And finally, there are collectivistic versus individualistic cultural differences in self-disclosure. In collectivistic cultures, disclosure is more cautious, but also it's not necessarily desirable. So we can't draw universal conclusions in terms of self-disclosure. It's very much culturally biased, and that needs to be noted when we draw conclusions about the universality of this theory. The second factor affecting attraction is physical attractiveness, and they specifically mentioned the matching hypothesis. This was the essay last year. It was an 8 marker, not a 16 marker, but still it was assessed as an essay last year. Physical attractiveness is universally identified by symmetry, for example, and symmetry is something desirable for both men and women, whereas baby face is something that is desirable, well, men like it in women, and that's again because it signals youth, as we said before, from the evolutionary theory of attachment. When we find someone physically attractive, we also have this halo effect that is a cognitive bias, whereby we think that because they're attractive, they're also going to be more socially pleasant, nice, kind, positive. This is a complete cognitive bias, but it is something that we believe, and that influences our attraction to physically good-looking people. Now, the premise of the matching hypothesis that is named on the syllabus, so you might be asked about specifically, maybe in a shorter question, is that attractive people expect to have someone at their same level of attractiveness, and also that satisfaction in a relationship comes from feeling that you've got the best possible option for your own level of attractiveness. So everybody would like the most attractive person, but the matching hypothesis says that we have to compromise and make realistic choices. The thing that nobody wants in a relationship is to be rejected. So we avoid people that are out of our league, that are much more attractive than us, because it's not effective. It's not good for our self-esteem. It's not effective in terms of how quickly we can get a mate. And if we think about the kind of purposes of finding a partner, that might be reproduction, we want to be as quick as possible in reaching that goal, and therefore we'll discard people that are much more attractive than us, but at the same time we won't want people that are much less attractive than us, so we try to find the realistic choice within what's available. Okay, so now Wolster and Wolster, who came up with the matching hypothesis, did these computer dance studies where they basically told people that they had been assigned through a kind of random computer generator to a partner. In their first study, people were matched randomly, and unsurprisingly, even if they were assigned a partner that was much more attractive than them, they were interested in a next date. So that kind of challenged the matching hypothesis, because they didn't pick someone of their same level of attractiveness, but maybe because they thought if it's an available option, then why not? Whereas in a follow-up study where the participants were given a choice of who to partner up with, people all chose partners who had been objectively rated by other people at the same level of attractiveness. So in reality, when people make a choice, they tend to go spontaneously to people that match their same attractiveness level. Meltzer found that attractiveness of men's wives related to the levels of husband satisfaction, whereas that didn't apply to women. So again, physical attractiveness seems to be more salient in men's choices than women's choices, meaning that the matching hypothesis might be beta bias. It might assume that everybody looks at attractiveness levels, when in fact that's more a male. So you could say it's beta bias, and you could also say that it's androgen. So Sprecher and Hatfield argued that the original matching hypothesis is an oversimplification, and they suggest the complex matching hypothesis when they say that there are other assets that can compensate for a lack of physical attractiveness. That could be it could be personality, sense of humor, wealth, and this might apply especially to women's perspective. They might not mind that a man is unattractive if they're funny and rich and strong and in kind of status, for example. Towie found another extraneous variable that might apply to the extent to which a matching hypothesis is relevant to all people, and he found that only participants who showed high levels of sexist attitude were more influenced by physical attractiveness. So again, there's lots of criticism to the matching hypothesis being an oversimplification, applying mostly to men, and even in the male population maybe applying to those who have more sexist attitude, meaning that it's not a theory that we can apply universally. The next factor affecting attraction in romantic relationships is filter theory, and that has not been assessed since 2020. It was a short 8-mark essay, so it's been a while. As you can see, all the filters have been named: social demography, similarity in attitudes, and complementarity. So you might expect to be assessed on one of those aspects, or even potentially in an extended 16-mark question here. The key idea of filter theory is that romantic attraction is a process. So it happens gradually and it changes over time. So we choose someone for a certain reason and we stay with them for other reasons that change over the space of what they researched was 18 months. So you see, the previous studies, theories looked at attraction, so the choice of partner immediately. Filter theory is a kind of bridge into the next section that will be theories of why we stay with someone, and it looks a bit more longitudinally at primary reasons for being attracted, so choice of partner, and why you stay attracted to that partner or not over a longer period of time. The three filters are social demography, similarity in attitudes, and complementarity. And as I said, these are based on short-term couples versus long-term couples. So the cutoff line for short and long-term was 18 months. And they looked at them longitudinally to see whether the priorities changed over time. Because the three filters are named, we're going to just look at them all individually. So the first one is social demography. It's things such as age, location, ethnicity, how geographically close someone is to you, and that's the kind of ease of starting a relationship. It's easier to start a relationship that is with someone who lives nearby, who's your same age. It might be someone you go to school with, or you work with, or a neighbor. It's just about the likelihood of a person that is in your kind of range and in your area and similar to you to have more in common, and it makes it easier to kick off a relationship with them. As you move on and get to know the person, the most important filter becomes the core belief. So the filters are used to separate from the people that are available to you to the people that are desirable to you. So if someone is physically close and your age, etc., but then as you get to know them, you find out that their core beliefs, maybe their political views, their religious views, clash with yours, then that might make them not desirable anymore, and therefore you move on from the relationship. And the last one, once the relationship is established, you know that your core values are the same, then what might become important in long-term couples, so after the 18 months cutoff, is complementarity. Is the partner offering something to the relationship that I might not be able to achieve with my own kind of skills and abilities? So Winch found that similarities of personality, interest, and attitudes are typical in the earliest stage. So this is what would attribute face validity to the theory. There is evidence to support the first filter. If you were to write Peel paragraph, you would say, to some extent, filter theory is supported. You'll say what Winch found, that similarity is more important at the earlier stages, and then complementarity is more important in the kind of longer term married couples. And then the link back is to say that filter theory might be right to claim that the key factors are in a relationship change over time. So this is how you would link it back to that kind of development of a relationship over time. However, there is a failure to replicate. Not all studies have confirmed these three filters and the kind of timeline of them to be accurate, meaning that there's a lack of replicability. We can't really rely on the findings being generalized to all circumstances and all times. One possible reason might be that the 18-month cutoff point is not accurate because it's assuming that people who have been together for 18 months or more are committed in a relationship. If it's a on-off or long-distance relationship, that might be not the case. It might just be that someone stays with someone without really committing just because nothing better's turned out. And that's why filter theory doesn't seem to apply to every couple in the same timeline. There's also this emotional convergence theory that says that people that are attractive to each other might not be similar to begin with, but by spending time together, they converge, they become more similar. So what you could argue is that when people self-report that they've got similarities with their partner, it might not be because they initially were similar and that's why they got together, but actually the fact that they're together has made them also more similar in terms of personality and values, meaning that the direction of causal relationship between similarity and attraction might be inverted. It might be that attraction causes similarities. The first filter talks about physical closeness, kind of geographical availability, so we could question the temporal validity, the relevance of this theory today, because obviously mobile apps and also the ability to move much more freely across the country and the world might mean that this theory is a bit obsolete for this time. And here is a plan for filter theory if you want to pause and jot down some ideas. Now we move on to theories of romantic relationships. These are different because they don't tell us why someone initially chooses a partner or another. That was the factors affecting attraction. But now we're moving on to why people either stay or don't stay in an existing relationship. So the first part was on formation of relationship, and this next part is about maintenance of relationships. So social exchange theory is one of three economic theories of relationships that we're going to look at. What they all have in common is that they use the language of economics, and they see relationships as some sort of business transaction. So there's a kind of interest or economic reason to keep one relationship and not another. So the key idea of this social exchange is that everybody aims to minimize the costs and maximize the benefits in a relationship, therefore reaching the maximum profit from the relationship. If we feel that the benefits outweigh the costs, then we will maintain the relationship. The way people establish whether they're benefiting the most from the relationship is also by looking at two levels of comparison. The comparison level looks at previous experience, social cultural norms, and personal self-esteem. So what have I had before? Is this giving me more benefit than my previous relationships, for example? Social cultural norms, what is expected? Is this person giving me the most as is expected from society? So for example, if I'm in a society where a man should buy flowers on Valentine's Day, that might be perceived as a benefit, whereas in another society it might not. And then obviously the person's own self-esteem. Do I believe that I deserve this, or do I deserve more? And that will also see some things as benefits for people with low self-esteem that someone with higher self-esteem might not see, like getting a phone call from one's partner might be seen as a benefit for some because they feel that they don't deserve that attention, whereas for others it might just be a normal expectation and not be seen as a benefit. The comparison level for alternatives also determines the kind of way we see costs and benefits, thinking what is available and is this person the best kind of deal that I can get compared to other potential relationships that might be available to me. So obviously the more options are out there available, the more comparison there will be, the more likely one is to come out of the relationship thinking that there's something better out there that will kind of give them more profit. The last point in social exchange theory is the idea that the relationship proceeds through a series of stages based on that cost-benefit analysis. So obviously at the beginning there's sampling, looking at costs and rewards, and there's bargaining, maybe setting expectations, making requests, seeing if the person will respond to those requests and therefore increase the number of benefits, or maybe there's something that one doesn't like and kind of negotiating that change. And if that happens and the person feels they're getting again the best deal, then there will be a commitment. So maybe becoming more exclusive in the relationship, deciding not to see other people, focusing on the relationship, and accepting that is a beneficial relationship for both parties, and eventually institutionalization, meaning marriage, cohabitation, and therefore an acceptance that not looking so much at other options. So inevitably, most of the evidence will come from self-report, from people in relationships, reporting back on whether they're satisfied or not in the relationship and seeing whether that correlates to the key ideas in the social exchange theory. For example, here Floyd says that when they perceive that equally attractive or more attractive alternatives are unavailable to them, couples are more satisfied. So meaning, looking at that comparison level for alternatives, if I think that there's no one better out there, then I'll also be more satisfied in my relationship because I feel that it's the one that gives me the most benefits. If only that benefit is being in a relationship altogether. If someone is more satisfied, they're more likely to commit to the relationship, therefore also look less around, not look for the alternatives, and more likely therefore to maintain the current relationship. Sprecher is another study on comparison level for alternatives, looking at 101 couples. For both men and women, it was found that the higher they rated alternatives, the lower their levels of satisfaction were in their current relationship. Those who lacked alternatives reported the higher levels of satisfaction, therefore confirming the idea that when looking at cost and benefits, one of the costs might be not being in a relationship at all, meaning that the more options I feel I have, the less satisfied I am, the less likely I am to stay in my relationship because I feel that there could be something better out there. And that supports that comparison level and the kind of cost-benefit analysis that social exchange theory suggests. Here is a key study. What they found in these 185 couples, and what you need to notice here is that it's looking at both heterosexual and same-sex couples, so we can't use that heteronormative criticism for this theory, is that there's greater relationship satisfaction is associated with one, the perception of many benefits in the current relationship, but also seeing the alternatives as less attractive. So we've got consistent evidence through that seems to be universal for men, women, gay, straight couples, that having feeling that you're in the best possible option relationship is the main predictor of whether you will be satisfied and therefore whether you will stay in the relationship or not. Now, there are criticisms saying that this is a very rational theory, that it doesn't look at emotions, it doesn't look at the human side of relationships. For example, Argyll states that people don't really start doing a cost-benefit analysis in their relationship that they might have started because of emotions, such as love, and actually they might start appraising the relationship only after something bad happens. So maybe I'm fine with my relationship, but then my partner cheats on me, and then I start looking at alternatives out there. Not while I'm in a happy relationship. I still think in the back of my mind, well, but what are the other options that I have? So there's a question about the causality. Do people leave a relationship because there are better alternatives, or do people look for alternatives when they've already been triggered into wanting to finish the relationship because of something that happened? Another limitation is that social exchange theory has some flaws, some lacking elements. For example, it doesn't consider fairness, that will be looked at in equity theory. Also, it doesn't consider evolutionary factors. It sees everything as a conscious choice rather than driven by a biological need to be in a partnership. So there's that free will and determinism question there. And also it doesn't explain why people stay in abusive relationships, that we'll see will be explained in the investment model. If you want to pause and have a look at some questions, this is just a reminder that you can get research method questions in paper free. The second theory of romantic relationships is equity theory. Now, in 2022, there was a 16 marker that was an applied question referring to theories of romantic relationships in general. So equity theory has never been assessed in its own right, only as part of a broader question about theories of romantic relationships. First of all, if you're presenting equity theory, you would clarify that equity does not mean equality, but it's balanced. It's all about looking at the profit and looking at whether it's the same. It's not the size of the rewards and cost that matters, but the ratio. And that's what needs to be balanced between the two parties. The main focus of equity theory compared to social exchange theory is that it's not only about how much I can get, but whether there's fairness and balance in that giving and receiving. If that doesn't happen, according to equity theory, the over-benefited team partner might feel guilty, uncomfortable, or ashamed that they feel that they're getting so much but they're not putting enough in the relationship. The one that will be the most dissatisfied, obviously, will be the under-benefited partner, who will feel humiliated, angry, resentful. So we do use those two keywords, over-benefited and under-benefited, to identify both consequences of a lack of equity in the relationship. So the 4 key principles of equity theory are, in line with social exchange theory, people try to maximize rewards and minimize costs. So these 3 theories are not separate from each other, the economic theories. They're just, each theory is a development of the previous one. So the next point is that the distribution of rewards has to be negotiated to ensure fairness, and that's a new point that equity theory brings in. Unfair relationships will create dissatisfaction, and the idea is, even if you're getting lots of benefits and no costs, you'll still be dissatisfied because you're aware that the relationship is not equitable. So in terms of evaluation, we've got research on married couples that, again, we had to use self-report to find out these questions, and it looked at the level of equity that they perceived in the relationship, the level of satisfaction that they had in the relationship, and also the extent to which they used what we call relationship maintenance strategies. So how much did they work to keep the relationship going? For example, did they offer assurance to their partner? Did they help out, like washing the dishes or taking care of the kids? And how positively did they feel, and did they talk about the relationship? Unsurprisingly, the equitable couples were those that used the most maintenance strategies and also had the highest levels of satisfaction. Individuals who felt under-benefited were the ones that used the fewer maintenance strategies and also showed the lowest levels of satisfaction. Over-benefited partners were also less satisfied than the equitable partners, but not as much as the under-benefited. So these are not surprising findings. Culture has been investigated as a potential extraneous variable in the equity, the views on equity, and what they compared was students from the University of Hawaii, that is an individualistic culture, compared to students of the University of West Indies in Jamaica, that is a collectivistic culture. They did find some differences. In Hawaii, participants reported higher satisfaction when they were in an equitable relationship. This supports equity theory, whereas in Jamaica, participants did feel quite happy with being over-benefiting in the relationship, meaning that this theory doesn't apply universally to all cultures potentially. In terms of gender differences, there are also quite significant gender differences. Again, maybe unsurprisingly, women are more sensitive to inequity. They're more likely to feel under-benefited, and men are less affected by perceived inequity. So women, again, this theory seems to apply more to women than to men. We can say that this has real-world application. If we can understand why a relationship ends, and that might be because of feeling that there's an imbalance and unfairness in the amount of benefits and costs, then we can use that in couples therapy. For example, there is a strategy used with couples where they're required to improve the amount of positives, like rewards, that they provide their partner, in proportion to the costs. For example, for every negative, every bad thing that happens, the couple has to kind of strive to make up with 3 positives. And that has been effective for 2/3 of couples that have been in this kind of couples therapy, showing that understanding the role of equity in relationship maintenance can actually help in couples therapy to help people restore the satisfaction in their relationship. And here is the essay plan if you want to check it out and pause the video and make some notes, or you can go to the Quizlet where you have all the essay plans. The last theory of romantic relationships is Rusbolt's investment model. As you can see from the syllabus, there's a mention of lots of keywords: commitment, satisfaction, comparison with alternatives, and investment. So they can ask you to define the concept of investment as well. This came up as an 8-marker just about investment theory in 2020. And then, as I mentioned before, there was a general applied question in 2022. As I mentioned before, the investment model is a development of social exchange theory. It means that it still agrees with the key ideas in social exchange theory, but it sees it as oversimplified and adds some element to it. The idea is that many couples stay together even if the costs outweigh the benefits. So even if they're dissatisfied, they still stay in the relationship. And that's what Rusbolt tried to explain with this concept of investment. So as you can see from this diagram, Rusbolt's model includes a lot of concepts from social exchange theory. For example, costs and benefits, comparison level, and comparison level for alternative. So the idea is that if a person is dissatisfied and has other options that are available, they still might stay in a relationship because of the investment. And that explains to us why people who are in unhappy relationships might stay, because commitment is not only based on satisfaction and a lack of alternatives, it's also based on investment. So investment refers to the number of resources, both tangible and intangible, that people will lose if they leave the relationship. So the investment size seems to be what influences commitment to the relationship. Commitment then establishes the extent to which someone is likely to stay in the relationship or to leave. So in terms of predictive validity, investment theory is a more comprehensive theory that can explain to us how we can predict why some people will stay in a relationship even if they're not very happy in it. There are 2 subtypes of investment, and this would be if you are asked a longer question, maybe a 4 or 6 marker on describing the concept of investment in investment theory. You can talk about these intrinsic and extrinsic types of investment. Intrinsic are the resources that we directly put into the relationship. For example, it could be the amount of time we've spent in nurturing the relationship, the emotions that we put in, and also the personal disclosure. How much have we told this person that is meaningful, and what will it mean to kind of break off from this person that knows us so well and knows us so intimately. And then there are more kind of tangible investments that are resources connected to the relationship, resources that could be things like possessions and assets, but also social networks. If we break up, who will we stay friends with? What are the implications for my relationships with my kind of social network? What are the financial implications of breaking up? How will I cope with all the kind of pictures and memories from all these years together that now have been kind of tainted by the fact that we're not together anymore? So evaluating this theory, first of all, looking at women that stay with their partner, found that investment is as significant as satisfaction and comparison level to explain why women stay with their partners. And these findings have been replicated again and again with large-scale meta-analysis showing that commitment compared to satisfaction is the bigger predictor of whether a relationship will last or not. supporting the view that investment theory is a more comprehensive explanation of maintenance of romantic relationships compared to those that only focus on satisfaction levels. And as I said, you can use the concept of predictive validity because of this evidence that is cross-cultural, longitudinal, both on homosexual and heterosexual relationships. We can say that investment model is the most useful predictor of whether a relationship will last or not. Another thing that it can do is explain why people stay in abusive relationships. So Martz and Rusball studied battered women, and they found that the women that are most likely to return in an abusive relationship are the ones that have the greatest investment, and also not having appealing alternatives. So as I mentioned before, social exchange isn't discarded, it's considered as part of the decision making, but investment is even a very salient factor. Not all the evidence supports Rusball's theory. For example, it says that investment model doesn't account for new relationships where, in theory, no investment has been made. But Goodfriend and Agnew argue that investment is not only in what has already been kind of put into the relationship, but it can be also the kind of fantasy of future plans. So if someone really wants to get married, even when they've dated someone only a few times, because they really want to get married, their future plans have been an investment in the relationship as well. So it could be not only investment in the past, but also a kind of imaginary investment in the future that Rusball didn't consider. Obviously, like for any study in relationships, it's impossible to assign scientific credibility despite the large data, because it's all measured completely on self-report. So it's very difficult to measure objectively. We're including this point here because actually there's a counter argument for it, because Rusball developed an investment model scale to measure these constructs of commitment and satisfaction, qualitative alternatives, and investment size. And this was actually found to be quite a reliable tool to measure investment level. So you're saying not only you're saying yes, there are questions on the scientific credibility, but you're developing the point by saying that attempts have been made to make the model more credible, and that's why this is a point that in this case you can use, but generally speaking would be quite weak. So there is one last theory of romantic relationships that is not connected to the previous three. It's not an economic theory of relationships, and it doesn't really talk about maintenance of relationship, but it talks about when the relationship ends, and that's Duck's phase model of relationship breakdown. As you can see, the 4 stages of breakdown are mentioned explicitly on the syllabus, meaning they could ask you about every single one of these stages, or they could give you an applied question and ask you to identify which stages are relevant to the scenario. This was an essay in 2023, so relatively recently. What is special about Duck's model is that it looks at relationship breakdown not as a single event, but as a process. And therefore, he goes on to outline the 4 key stages of a relationship breakdown. The first one is intrapsychic, within a person's mind. They start feeling dissatisfied and start thinking about what's wrong with the relationship, what might be better in another relationship, but they keep it to themselves. In the second stage, they share their dissatisfaction with the partner. There might be a conflict, discussion, and possibly a kind of rebargaining of the conditions of the relationship to see all ultimatums being issued to see if the relationship can be repaired. If that's not the case, then it moves on to the social stage of relationship, where the relationship becomes public, people are told, friends and family are involved, and that's where it all kind of becomes a social event. So everybody kind of might decide to chip in, to say things like, oh, I never liked them anyway, maybe you're better off without, or no, you should stay. So the social stage is quite critical in the decision making, because everybody kind of gets involved. And this is a quote from Duck: breakup involves not only the individual who creates the breakup, but the psychological sense of integrity of the person to whom it all happens. But a lot of that happened what happens is done with an eye on the group. So what will people think? How will they judge me? If I'm leaving someone but they haven't done anything wrong, how will their family judge me? How will my family judge me? How will society judge me? So it's a very, very much social experience. If the decision is made to break up, finally, after all that, then the relationship ends. There's the grave dressing stage. Both partners will create a narrative where usually that benefits them to justify the breakup and protect their self-image. So each side will tell their own story as to why it ended. The person who kind of initiated the breakup might say that they felt neglected, unseen, misunderstood, and the person who was broken up might create a narrative where that person was never happy, they always wanted too much, too demanding, or with a wandering eye. So both of them will create narratives where they come out the best possible way to maintain their self-image and their self-esteem. So the first criticism to Duck's model that Duck acknowledged himself was that it was incomplete. So after a review, they added a fifth phase that was the resurrection phase, where they look at after that breakup, what happens, how people kind of learn from the breakup. They don't become bitter, but they become better. They maybe have a new relationship that they go into with the wisdom of what went wrong in the previous relationship, and they live better for it. There's also the question as whether that process is linear. For example, after the social stage, you might revert back to the dyadic stage, where after feedback from family, you go back and kind of try to renegotiate with the partner the relationship. So it's not necessarily always linear, and at stage 4, it's all over forever. People can obviously go back to a relationship afterwards and try again. So it's incomplete in its original form. There's also a criticism from the outside of the oversimplification of the model. For example, it doesn't consider the effect of whether you are the one who gets dumped or the one who dumps. In reality, those who didn't initiate the relationship dissolution, so the person who gets dumped, is going to be significantly more miserable than the person who initiates the breakup. So that's completely overlooked in Duck's model, and that means that it doesn't really give us a full idea of what the breakup looks like, especially for the two parties involved. It's also extremely descriptive. It doesn't have any explanatory power. It doesn't tell us why the relationship breaks down, only how it kind of goes through those stages, so how it unfolds, but not why. We've got various theories to explain why it breaks down. For example, we've got pre-existing doom, those couples that everybody kind of knows will never work. We've got mechanical failure, where people just kind of grow apart, stop loving each other, lose interest, or maybe kind of change the way they are from their own personal development and no longer are compatible. And then we've got sudden death, that usually is one party kind of falling for someone else and the relationship ending quite abruptly. There's also the fatal attraction theory, saying that the people that we're attracted to initially might be the ones that are very different from us, and those characteristics that made us attracted to them initially are the exact reason why we break up from them. So there are alternative explanations that are more helpful in understanding the why of a breakup rather than just the how. Methodologically, the issue is that it's based on retrospective data. People will not remember necessarily objectively and accurately. We know that anyway from eyewitness testimony, but in this case even more so. There's a need to kind of be biased to kind of implement that own narrative that was reached at the end of the relationship, and therefore it's impossible to know what actually happens with the relationship. And ethically, you can't go to a couple that is kind of doubting their relationship and start following them longitudinally just to kind of have live data on how the relationship breaks down. In terms of real life application, it might help us identify, although it's descriptive, so it doesn't tell us the why, it might help us identify whether a couple is still in a stage of their breakup where efforts can be made to reverse the process, and looking at different strategies that can be used at different stages. For example, the dyadic stage would be ideal for therapy to kind of maybe prevent the couple from going public with their doubts, because once other people get involved, it gets much more messy, and the wanting to maintain a certain self-image might override the desire to kind of resolve the relationship. Again, there is cultural bias here. Non-Western relationships that are collective are seen as obligatory and permanent, so the breakup doesn't really apply, and definitely the intrapsychic stage is less likely to occur because people don't see leaving the relationship as an option, so they won't even consider it in their own mind. So it doesn't really apply to that kind of cultures where once you get married, that's it, and there's no option to come out of it. Here's an example. As I said, this is very frequently asked as an applied question, so you can pause and have a think of how you would answer this question, and then I'll put the mark scheme in the next slide. And here you go. Have a look, compare, contrast if you did answer this question, and then we're going to move on. Virtual relationships was asked in 2017 as an essay, and in 2023 in general. So talking about general virtual relationships. And in 2017 there was a question on self-disclosure in virtual relationships. Self-disclosure in virtual relationships has two opposing theories that will argue either that self-disclosure is more likely or that it's less likely. So let's look at both of them now. The reduced cues theory says that in virtual relationships, because there are not those kind of cues that are present in face-to-face relationships, so for example, facial expression, tone of voice, non-verbal cues, then there's a phenomenon of de-individuation. A person feels more protected and more able to say whatever comes to their minds without any kind of filter, therefore become more disinhibited in their behavior. That could result in blunt and even aggressive communication. That means that self-disclosure is less likely in virtual relationships because of that fear of disinhibition in the interactions. On the other hand, the hyperpersonal model states that virtual relationships can develop quickly and disclosure can happen earlier, and therefore make the relationship become more intense and more significant much sooner. One reason for self-disclosure happening quicker and sooner is because the sender can manipulate their own message, their own image. This is called selective self-presentation, and therefore they can present positive and idealized images of self. Another reason why self-disclosure might be higher in virtual relationships rather than face-to-face is because of the element of anonymity. Because people feel less accountable for what they say and do, they might be more open to just say what comes to their mind, and therefore disclosing more to strangers. This is known as the stranger on the train phenomenon, and it happens in real life as well. Sometimes we're more prone to tell someone we don't know and that isn't in our life our kind of personal, intimate thoughts and feelings, because we'll never see them again. And that's true also in virtual relationships. We can just kind of delete them, cancel them, block them, and therefore that information will never have to be accountable for that. One thing about the hyperpersonal model is that it acknowledges that because the self-disclosure is so much so soon, and we know that's not normal, that's not typical in the social penetration theory. We saw that it has to happen in layers, gradually, over time. So because in virtual relationship it happens so quickly, so soon, there's this likelihood of a boom and bust phenomenon, meaning that the relationship is explosively high in intimacy very early, but also ends very quickly, because that's not the typical way self-disclosure is supposed to work. Let's evaluate self-disclosure in virtual relationships. They looked at comparing internet and face-to-face meetings. In this case, the participants were meeting the same person either on the internet or in face-to-face, and they were asked to rate the person in terms of how much they liked them and how intimate they felt with them. And all participants displayed a higher level of intimacy with the person that they had met online, therefore supporting the hyperpersonal model. There are arguments against, especially the cue theory, that is saying that in reality today, online communication does have non-verbal cues such as emojis, acrostics, GIFs, and whatnot. So actually, lots of virtual platforms do offer the opportunity to provide non-verbal cues, challenging the kind of temporal validity of that the reduced theory, the reduced cue theory. Now, virtual relationships have a lot of practical applicability in therapy setting for people that are experiencing, for example, social anxiety. Being able to self-disclose in virtual environments might really help people with poor social skills, feeling that they can develop more meaningful long-term intimate relationships. And that's true for online dating maybe, or gaming platforms, but even some people will prefer to access therapy online rather than in person, even through just messaging and texting. And that is obviously more inclusive. It might help people benefit from therapy and improve their self-esteem and reduce their levels of anxiety by having successful relationships. In terms of individual differences, unsurprisingly, it's introverts that prefer online communication rather than extroverts, meaning that when we're looking at self-disclosure and virtual relationships, it doesn't apply universally to all individuals, and not all individuals will benefit from virtual relationships more or less than face-to-face relationships. It will be more or less the same for extroverts. The next named element in virtual relationship is the effects of absence of gating on the nature of virtual relationships. This was an essay in itself, a 16-marker in 2017, and then in 2023, virtual relationships in general were assessed. So firstly, we want to define the concept of gate. A gate is any obstacle to the formation of a relationship. So in face-to-face interactions, gates could be being unattractive, having a stammer, having social anxiety, having a physical disability, or even simply shyness. Removing these obstacles means that people can focus on presenting themselves as their true self without their main feature being maybe their stammer or the way they look or a physical disability, and therefore being able to get the relationship off the ground and therefore develop a meaningful relationship in an online setting. A concern is that the absence of gating also means that people can create online identities, idealized perceptions, and also it can mask important incompatibilities, meaning that the relationship might get off the ground, but then maybe be based on deception, be a con. So even though it might help people that have lower self-esteem initially, it might end up having such negative consequences, exacerbating their levels of low self-esteem. Evaluating the absence of gating, we've got the same study looking at internet versus face-to-face meeting, and the preference for internet meetings seems to support that the absence of gating makes people feel that they can be their true selves and therefore develop a sense of stronger intimacy. In terms of real-world evidence, we can say that the success of our online dating in itself supports the idea that absence of gating is beneficial to promote online relationships, and also specifically marginalized groups seem to benefit particularly from online relationships. For example, 67% of disabled people reported that they have tried online dating, and 45% had a positive experience. This supports both aspects, that yes, it allows the access to relationships for people that might not be able to do so in face-to-face context, or might find it more challenging, but also that 45% suggests that some people will have those negative experiences because of catfishing or false misrepresentations, or maybe just the disappointment when the virtual relationship shifts into face-to-face relationship. We can also argue that there's a beta bias. For example, we have seen again and again that males value physical attractiveness much more than females. So assuming that the absence of gating applies for both genders to the same extent is an oversimplification. It's a beta bias. It's overlooking the fact that not presenting themselves as unattractive for females will be significantly more important than for male individuals. Again, despite better video and photo sharing tools, most online interactions still begin through text-based, and therefore you could argue that individuals with social anxiety, physical disabilities, or stigmatized trait can still avoid being judged in an online situation that they wouldn't be able to avoid in face-to-face. So in this case, we're saying that virtual relationships have gone through the test of time, and they're still beneficial for individuals that wouldn't benefit as much from face-to-face relationships. Also, we can say not only that, but actually online platforms have become more inclusive because they've got screen readers, captioning, and therefore they've made it even more possible to remove all the gates that people with some disabilities might have experienced in real life relationships, meaning that it's incredibly beneficial. We would say that the benefits outweigh the costs, and that the absence of gating can be seen as providing more benefits for the ability to develop a relationship for certain categories of people rather than the negative effects. The last topic in relationships is parasocial relationships. Levels of parasocial relationships has never been asked as a question in its own right, although it's been embedded in the mark scheme for the second section of parasocial relationship, that is the absorption addiction model. They've never asked about these levels explicitly by themselves, but you can include this information also when you're talking about the absorption addiction model. So parasocial relationships means that it resembles a relationship, but it's not a real relationship, and the main reason is because they are one-sided. What that means is that the target of the affection is unaware of the existence of the person that has affection for them. These relationships are very appealing for certain individuals because there are few to no demands from the other party in the relationship, because there's only one person involved in the relationship, and that's why they're not actual relationships, but they're a kind of different version of relationships that doesn't include any interaction. Now, Maltby used the celebrity attitude scale to identify 3 levels of parasocial relationships, and this was developed by McCullough in 2002. It measures the social aspects associated with celebrity worship, the intensity of the celebrity worship, and the potentially harmful aspects of celebrity worship, so of parasocial relationships. So these 3 levels are entertainment social, that is perfectly acceptable, functional, just enjoying the celebrity gossip and usually enjoying it as a kind of social event with other friends that are kind of fans. Intense personal is having strong feelings, maybe kind of watching everything involved with that celebrity and crying when you see that celebrity in a concert. But the borderline pathological, so the 3rd level, is the only one that is kind of concerning, because the amount of money and time spent, and the willingness to do things that are dangerous or illegal for that celebrity is what is kind of psychologically concerning about that last level. What they found was that 20% of people fell into the entertainment social, 10% in the intense personal, and as you can see, borderline pathological is statistically very rare, and therefore we would say that that's the only one that psychologically would present a concern. Now, very briefly, if you were asked to evaluate these levels of parasocial relationships, you could say that the celebrity attitudes scale is includes distractor items, so questions that are not relevant to the topic in question, to avoid response bias, so that brings in a bit of kind of specialist terminology from research methods. And also at a practical level, it helps us to distinguish between pathological and non-pathological patterns, so those who might require psychological support and intervention and those who are not. So it will help, for example, parents establish whether their teenager is showing pathological traits or traits that are fairly common at that age in terms of worshipping a celebrity. In terms of issues, obviously, as any self-report measure, there's an issue of social desirability bias that might be also influenced by the kind of peer group and their attitudes towards celebrity worship. And there are also extraneous variables. For example, personality factors such as impulsivity, extroversion, and neuroticism seem to be involved in celebrity worship and parasocial relationships. And therefore, people who will score high on the intense personal level might also have these personality traits, meaning that personality might be more important to focus on rather than their score on this inventory. The next topic is the absorption addiction model. As I said, there was an essay question on parasocial relationships in general, and there was also an 8 marker in 2023 specifically about the absorption addiction model. So the idea is that people who develop parasocial relationships have deficiencies in their own lives, and they adopt a parasocial relationship to escape from the reality of their life, possibly because of traumatic events, or to fill the gaps left in a real life relationship ending. The concept of absorption is becoming preoccupied with a celebrity to the point of identifying with them. So the identity of the person in the parasocial relationship and the celebrity become merged into one. It could be researching them, knowing everything about them, listening to their music 24/7, buying ridiculous amount of merchandise, and feeling that one's own identity is defined by worshipping this celebrity. And then there's the addiction model. That means that the more one is exposed to the celebrity and does everything, their world revolves around the celebrity, the more they need to kind of increase it. So it has addictive qualities such as tolerance, needing more and more of the kind of the substance, in this case the celebrity, in order to function, and all the world of the person revolving around that celebrity, and exaggerating more and more the kind of exposure to the celebrity, watching them, spending all your money and money you don't have, maybe even ending up stealing money maybe from your parents just to go to a concert or to buy a t-shirt and whatnot. The model therefore predicts that there will be an association between poorer mental health and the strength of the parasocial relationship. So the less the mental health, the more likely the parasocial relationship will have these addictive qualities. So when looking at evaluation, there's personality correlates. So there's evidence that people with high levels of anxiety and depression, body image issues, and dissociation and fantasy proneness, as we predicted in the absorption element, and it's shifting from one's own reality, by using the parasocial relationship to cover any kind of unacceptable reality that one wants to disassociate with. So this seems to support that these pathological levels of parasocial relationships are associated with poor mental health, so supporting the premise of the model. Again, we've got explicit links with social anxiety. Social anxiety increases the risk of celebrity worship, and therefore forming parasocial relationships will help compensate for issues in real life social deficiencies. In terms of real life application, one thing that has been found is that females with parasocial relationships also had a very poor body image. That's got real life applications because it means that having a parasocial relationship might be a precursor to the development of an eating disorder. So this is important because it can be used to prevent and monitor a young woman's eating patterns, their behavior towards food, their behavior towards their body, their all kind of sense of body image, only by detecting that they've got this kind of celebrity worship going on. That might help be a red flag to identify the risk of developing an eating disorder. So this has significant real life application. As we previously identified, there are methodological issues of self-report as usual, meaning that participants might bias their response, and both family members and the young people involved might give socially desirable answers. But also the research is correlational. So even if it was found that poor body image has been associated with celebrity worship, it might not be that celebrity worship causes poor body image. It might be the other way around, meaning that it's not necessarily a precursor, it's a correlate. And it might even be that parasocial relationships cause young women to have poor body image rather than having poor body image driving a young person to seek out parasocial relationships. So the causal relationship between those two variables is questioned, meaning that a parasocial relationship might not be a response to mental illness, but actually a cause of mental illness. So the direction of causality can be questioned. Now, interestingly, parasocial relationships are not culturally biased. What has been found that is celebrity worship is something that has been found across all cultures. That is quite interesting. In this study specifically, they looked at celebrity worship in relation to Harry Potter characters. And they found that all cultures showed a universal worship towards Harry Potter. It's likely to not be in the pathological realm, but still showing that the drive to form parasocial relationships is quite common, and it seems to be something innate rather than culturally biased. Now, as I said, a reminder that in a question, this is the mark scheme for the essay on the absorption addiction model, and as you can see, it includes explanation of the absorption addiction model, but also the levels of parasocial relationships are accepted as AO1 material, and also the evaluation of the scale you see here is also acceptable as AO3, because obviously identifying borderline pathological then links to the absorption addiction that talks about that aspect of parasocial relationships, meaning that you can include both aspects in a question on absorption addiction. And finally, we come to the last topic, that is the attachment theory as an explanation for parasocial relationships. This was, as I said, there was a general question on parasocial relationships in 2021, but it was also assessed as an 8 marker 7 years ago. So it has been assessed as a mini essay. So far, parasocial relationships has either been assessed as a 60 marker altogether or the subsections of it as mini essays. When we use attachment theory to explain parasocial relationship, we would look at early childhood experiences and the development of an insecure attachment as being the cause of later on in life developing parasocial relationships. This is because parasocial relationships can be seen as similar to attachments. For example, protest at the loss of the figure. So if a celebrity decides to quit a band, or you can't go to their concert, you'll have that kind of despair that is typical in small children when separated from their attachment figure. We also know that Bowlby explains that the failure to attach early in life can result in later problems such as affectionless behavior, poor internal working models, and therefore a poor internal working model might then cause it to be acceptable to develop a parasocial relationship. Unsurprisingly, it's the insecure resistant patterns of attachment that have been identified as most at risk for parasocial relationships. And the reason is that because an insecure resistant has experienced this inconsistent attachment pattern and has been intermittently rejected by their primary attachment figure, they have a concern that others will not reciprocate their desire for intimacy and attachment, and therefore turning to television characters and celebrities is a way of satisfying their unrealistic but especially unmet relational needs. Insecure avoidant don't want to form relationships in general. They've given up on that, so they're the least likely to form parasocial relationships. But also secure attachment is not likely to form parasocial relationship because usually they're well adjusted enough to form relationships in real life. And that's it for the AO1. That's enough breaking down the 3 types of attachment. So we'll move on to evaluation. Looking at stalkers, Kiernan found that 63% of stalkers experience a loss of caregiver in early childhood and 50% experience emotional and physical abuse. So you could say that these dysfunctional one-way relationships are more likely to happen for those people who have experienced a loss in early childhood or have been kind of abused and neglected in childhood. However, we need to make the distinction between parasocial relationships and stalking. Stalking involves unwanted contact and intimidation, whereas parasocial relationship is completely one way, and as we said, the recipient of this affection won't even know about the existence. So that study on stalking, although it associates dysfunctional relationships with early childhood loss or trauma, it doesn't necessarily relate to parasocial relationships. And in fact, further research has not confirmed any link between insecure attachment and the tendency to form parasocial relationships. There's not a direct link that has been found between insecure resistant attachment and parasocial relationship, but it does acknowledge this feature as a contributing factor. For example, if a person who develops a parasocial relationship has traits such as loneliness, low self-esteem, and identity deficits, that might be associated with a dysfunctional attachment pattern and a dysfunctional internal working model, especially the low self-esteem. So attachment theory might play a role, but indirectly or in combination with other models. So it's not a complete model of explaining parasocial relationships. You can still use the culture bias, the lack of culture bias point that we made before for attachment models. So you could argue that although parasocial relationships are universal, attachment theory is not. Yeah, so you could say that point and then combine it with this point in the model, in the plan, saying although parasocial relationships are universal, the way we categorize attachment types is culturally biased, meaning that we can't really combine an understanding for parasocial relationships with a categorization, because one is universal and the other one is culturally biased. And here's a last applied question, just to remind you that you could get shorter applied questions in this context rather than extended 16 markers.